Hey, movers and shakers. It's your host, April Wachtel, and in today's special episode, I speak to friends and industry icons, Lowder and Micaela Piccolo, about life in Shanghai during coronavirus. They share what they're doing to stay positive and productive under quarantine, what you should expect if your market has not yet adapted for the virus, and what bars and restaurants are doing across China to persevere. Without further ado, please enjoy my interview with Chris and Michaela.
The background here is this all started to bubble in China really around mid-January.
Mhm.
So we started getting lots of, obviously it was starting to get flagged in the Western press, but then locally in China on WeChat, there were more and more noise about it.
Mhm.
And people around that time started to wear face masks outside and get a little bit more conservative with their movements.
Mhm.
And we had a feeling that this was potentially going to escalate,
Mhm.
especially looking at the spread in China to different provinces, kind of like the map you see now in the States, where it went from one state in Hubei all over China.
Mhm.
And so then the country shut down, but shut down for Chinese New Year. So this happens every year anyway. There's a total national shutdown. It's like Christmas and 4th of July and everything wrapped into one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the largest holiday that happens every year. It's the
Mhm.
world's largest migration as well. So people
Mhm.
travel like crazy. They go home to their families. So it was a very interesting time for when things got shut down and the holiday actually got extended.
Yeah.
Um, this all meant we were like, okay, this is
So
much bigger than we realized.
So
Yeah.
China's shutdown has been technically from Chinese New Year, which was in mid-January, and then extended from there and has since stayed closed. So really since mid-Jan. So what Mick and I did is looked at the situation. I said, look, like as Mick just said, it's the largest mass migration of humans on the planet
Yeah.
every year. So you can imagine this is the worst possible scenario for a contagion. It's just going to inhale into Hubei and exhale into the rest of the country. So we said, look, I've lived in China now for 6.5, almost 7 years. Um, and the way that leadership tends to action things here is pretty quick. There's not much warning. Actions are decisive.
Yeah.
Decisions are final. So we looked at each other knowing that about China and said, uh, this iron curtain's going to close. Probably things are going to shut down. Probably quarantine's going to be real. So let's ride at least some of that outside the bubble because we don't really know. There were no precedents at that time, right?
We also didn't know much about what the virus was then, right? Remember,
Right.
so like we are all just seeing this sort of like immediate panic, people and things shutting down, and we were just kind of like, I don't know if we get sick and get stuck here, are we going to have access to medical care? It's like sort of how people are feeling in the States now.
It's
It's like,
Yep.
exactly what the States is going through right now.
yes. So I have a compromised immune system. I've been dealing with immune issues the past year, and we're trying autoimmune is invisible. So we don't really know if it hit me, like would I get more sick, or what happens is if they say we can't go outside and we have the dog, and there were so many layers to it. So we decided, we were like, okay, we found that our doggy daycare was still open and they needed this business. So we were like, all right, we'll send the dog there. And we booked a flight out and we went to Singapore right before things shut down, really.
Yeah.
So in Singapore, because it's all spread over Asia at that point.
Mm.
So at Singapore, did a 2-week quarantine, and then stayed in a hotel room for the next month.
Oh my
Uh,
God.
I could, after the 2 weeks was clear, I could go to the office. But Singapore still has this COVID issue. Now it's on the equator. So uh, if there's any argument around whether or not this is adversely impacted by hot weather,
Right. Yeah.
who knows? But Singapore has been through very careful management, and perhaps also thanks to the climate. It's hard to say. It's been pretty well managed, and there hasn't been this widespread of COVID-19 there?
In Singapore, they ordered right away, if you have traveled at all or been in contact with anyone that had traveled, you were ordered by the government to stay at home for 14 days, and your office couldn't penalize you for it. So you were forced to work from home, and they had to. There were systems in place. So, like in China as well, if you had traveled anywhere, they were like, you need to stay home.
Yeah.
And they started slowly going around, and not to scare people, but slowly shutting down businesses instead of a big announcement. So it didn't actually ensue so much panic here right away, which I thought was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So I've seen that contrast now between China and the US. And Singapore, no major closures, but they definitely were like,
not yet.
The airport and the coming and going and transportation was definitely different. People were taking less taxis. They were already very weary. So, but I didn't stay in Singapore the whole time. So after we were in Singapore, we realized that they were going to close travel and between the U.S. at some stage. And I was like, well, if it's now, I might as well go home. I was thinking, I'll spend some time with family. I'll get some work done. And needless to say, it was another wild. I was hiding out as well because a lot of people were mad that I didn't come out and see people, but I was like, you don't understand. I'm nervous, so I had another layer of tension there. So, and then eventually we wrote it out enough to the point where now the rest of the world, I was like, well, hopefully we should go back. Our dog,
Ironically, now it's full circle, and probably one of the safest places to be is back in China. Now that it certainly hasn't run its course, but the government has had such careful control and management of the situation that most of the new infection rate at this point, which is very low, are either imported cases, so sick people coming in from overseas, or still a little bit of transmission in Hubei, although that seems to be really slowing now. So it's been from what we can see so far, and who knows, because we're all in the middle of this very fluid situation, but it seems like the situation has been fairly well controlled here through intense quarantine measures. And so now we're back in quarantine. So this is the very long answer about our shared experience to your question, but this is our third quarantine. So we were in our apartment from mid-January until like February 2nd or 3rd. So we did like 17 or 18 days then went to Singapore where
no we left at the end of January for Singapore, like 28th, and then we went to Singapore. But then we stayed put in Singapore for a bit before we saw anyone else.
Had to repeat a 14-day quarantine there, and so now we're doing another 14 days. So this is our third set of 14-day quarantines. But I have to say that we're grateful, selfishly grateful, that there was some space in the middle there that we could go outside.
So first question then, big tips for looking so happy and put together after like 45 days in court.
Well, okay. What to say? First of all, this sucks, and there's no getting around the fact that it sucks.
Yeah.
So for our friends in the States who have been, we've gotten, I think probably since last Wednesday, when things really seemed like they tipped in the US from something that we're all joking about to something that's very real and is going to have serious impact in everyone's lives for a long time. It sucks, and it's going to suck for a long while. Like when you really think about what it means, the social distancing measures and flattening the curve and all this kind of thing, like that's a long-term strategy. And it's a difficult strategy to unwind. So when you really think realistically about the implications of having a mass quarantine strategy until either the situation is totally controlled or there's a vaccine, I mean, we're probably talking about July, August, right? And then you get
not
into
not to scare.
Well, I mean, just so I think that what I'm saying first and foremost is just be real. So this is not like 2 weeks and we're going to be back into the world. I mean, China's slowly just now maybe 2 weeks from now, China will slowly, carefully begin to reopen. And that's 10 weeks in. And that's under the most extreme possible quarantining.
Yeah.
Right.
So in the States, for example, where it seems like this is much farther along potentially before quarantines are being enacted in a piecemeal way, you could be talking about a lot longer. So Mick and I, from the very beginning, were like, okay, this is going to be reality. This is going to be reality for at least 3-4 months. So let's have some habits that we're doing that are non-negotiable, that keep us feeling like we're on solid ground. So
Right.
waking up early, showering and putting on nice clothes.
Yeah, sticking to a routine. I mean,
Yeah.
and it's even difficult. I mean, I know I was a bartender once, like you got up much later and your day functioned differently, but as much as you can stick to what is normal for you is really key. Getting up, getting dressed. And you'd be so surprised at how different you go about your day if you stay in your sweatpants or if you shower
Yeah.
and put on
Right.
jeans. I was like, I don't even want to do laundry. You're thinking like, I don't want to do this, but it actually feels so much better. Vitamin D, vitamins, I swear by them. Vitamin D, like taking care of just that and getting as much sleep, staying off socials, even though where you're getting your information. That was my big. I turned on like the option on my iPhone to shut my phone off at certain times, so I just don't access my apps to remind me. Just be like, chill, take a minute. We exercise.
Yes.
I mean, you know him. He's the exercise king, the kind of stuff. I've been doing a lot of yoga, or just like even taking space, meditating, stretching, like more than anything.
Just take care of your environment. Light some candles. Get some evergreen plants.
Oh yeah, I've been ordering eucalyptus and lavender because I know a lot of the flower shops, you have to imagine, are probably suffering, right? But these because like nobody wants to celebrate or spend, a flower becomes sort of like an added
luxury.
Yeah, exactly. And so I've been getting hanging eucalyptus in the shower, like laying it around, just trying to make it feel. I mean, if you're gonna be home, you might as well make it feel like you're at the spa or something.
Right.
And eucalyptus and lavender are like super cheap, so it makes you feel a little bit better if you're gonna spend it. So, anything else you want to add?
I just want to stress that it's going to be for a long time. But just to really get that in, because even now the people that I'm talking to who are reaching out to us for some advice, and we've been saying for a while, like, this is coming. It doesn't strike us that people have been saying it's not containable, right? That's the reality. So when you really think about how long that takes to play out in a society with like 300 million people or 400 million or 1.5 billion here, that's a really long time, even if it's just fully running its course, right? Unmitigated.
Sure,
So when you honestly think about how long that takes and how long that will take, like, this is going to be a long ride. So that's my not fun, very sober advice for people who are tuning in, is just be really serious with yourself about it's going to be a long time. Society is not going to collapse, but everyone's going to do a big pivot. And which I guess we'll get into in a second. Everyone's going to do a big pivot, and there will be a new normal. And you should think about what that new normal is going to look like for you, because like, we're all used to, if there's a holiday or if there's a snow day when you're at school, or if your offices are closed, what do? You're like, okay, I'm going to put on my sweatpants. I'm going to load up some Netflix. I'm going to like order a pizza and just kind of chill. But this isn't that, right? Yeah. This is you need to rethink about how you're living your life and interacting with your world in a way that feels sustainable and in a way that feels productive.
one of the things is, yes, is this is real for everyone, every country, every state, even in Shanghai, every province, every sort of like sector or county, as it would be an equivalent into the US, everybody's going through a different quarantine. So I think the one thing to remember is that like what's happening for you is not happening to everyone else.
Right.
Everybody has a very specific, I'm hearing different school issues, different government issued stuff in the States. And so there's a little bit of like, please act with, with compassion when you understand. It is very good to ask around and to see how everyone else is coping, because some people will be dealing with restrictions differently and have coped before you had.
Yes.
And there's so much that you can offer one another. So obviously communicating is so very important, but there's a do not get bitter at like, why can they do this and I can't, and what's happening to them and I can't. I mean, I know people looking at major cities like New York as a setting a precedent for a lot, right? But what's going to happen here is going to be different than what happens in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. So, it's hard to say. So for here, I mean, when we came back, our quarantine has been so crazy. All of our friends here are like, wow, I didn't even know people were going through that. To them, they came back, life went back to normal almost. Some places that were completely unaffected by the virus, whereas in our neighborhood had more cases than most.
Gotcha.
So the restrictions are more strict, especially on foreigners coming back, because they're worried about us now, and I get that. You have to like remember and be patient and be like, God, this is so annoying, but I get it. Like, it is. So.
I'd say to that also is, as you're looking at what other people are doing in this time of quarantine, even if your rules are different, there's always something that you can learn, and there's always something that you can extrapolate from someone who's doing something productive. So for example, in China, and I'm sure we'll get into bars and businesses and what people can do shortly, but one of the things, and maybe this is a good spot to pivot, but one of the things that have been pretty successful in this area has been a lot of bars have turned to figuring out how to make their bar accessible remotely. So cocktail delivery, a bunch of strategies for helping people to still access their bar and brand and culture while things have been closed. And so we've been posting a lot about the strategies that have seemed very productive on our Instagrams and all of this, just to show people how people are managing in this part of the world where things are like a little bit farther down this timeline by a couple months. So, if you're looking at that and your reaction might be, well, wait a minute, the SLA, we've got these restrictions in the States that keep us from doing X, Y, and Z, so this doesn't apply to me. Well, I mean, yes and no, right? So on one hand, just like we're seeing today in New York, that they just announced that bars will be able to deliver cocktails during this crisis. It's a very fluid situation. So just because something has always been the case that X doesn't mean that that's how it's going to be during this crisis period, and doesn't mean that there's not going to be flexibility when things really start to get bad. So there's definitely something to learn. At the same time, also, just because you can't do literally the exact same thing that someone else is doing doesn't mean that there's not something to extrapolate. So, in the same way that Swig and Swallow has been so thoughtful about doing cocktail mixer deliveries door to door, for example. Well, that's a really good thing that seems like it's legal. That obviously
just
put that out there. Just we're clear to the listeners here. Well, there's no reason that you can't take that road or a halfway measure between here and there and still make something that people feel excited by and that can break up their quarantine life.
So let's take a step back then. If you guys don't mind explaining what bar culture is like in Shanghai, across China. Just let's do a minute or less overview so we can get top line overview, and then let's maybe jump into how things are changing and
Sure.
the initiatives people are taking to stay in business.
Sure. One of the first things to say that may be a surprise to some of your listeners or some people watching is that it's extraordinarily developed. We are very far down the cocktail road here in China.
Yeah.
And there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cocktail bars, probably thousands. There's cities like Shenzhen in southern China that have opened 2 to 3 cocktail bars probably at least 2 cocktail bars a week for the last 3 or 4 years in one city, and you multiply that by a bunch of massive cities. So it's extremely developed, and it exists in a lot of ways that the cocktail industry does not exist in the States. There's different avenues that cocktails have taken in China that I'm not saying it's ahead of the States, because these kinds of things aren't really linear anymore. But it's really, really developed. So it's more or less what you'd expect in the States.
Kind of one of the two things I'll say is that to-go cocktails have already existed in China.
Yep.
So there are companies that their whole thing is their cocktails on tap is a huge thing that, I mean, not just in China, in Asia.
Keg deliveries.
Cocktail bars that are focused as cocktails on tap, and then also to-go cocktails. You can get them in like little pouches and you take them away, and you have, bartenders from around the world or all over China coming and creating the recipe for them. And then the other side of that is that because of the way that the world is connected in China, specifically with WeChat, because there is no Facebook, there's no Instagram, there's no Google, all that stuff is blocked. Every bar has this sort of, not cult following, but they have a group chat where they have all of their regulars are able to stay informed by being in this group chat. So when everything sort of hit the fan here, people were able, as the bar owners and leaders, to reach out to their regulars directly and to say, here's what we're doing, and here's how you can help us, and here's how we can help you. And there was a conversation that most people don't have. In the States, I tell you, I was very close with my regulars, but I didn't have a group chat. I knew them directly, something like that, but I didn't have a place to be like, hey guys, here's what we're going to do in case of emergency. And so in terms of advancement, I think that these are the places that China really shines, and how beautiful it's been to see them come together for the F&B outlets that they want to love and support.
It's, to Mick's point, there's these are some of the ways that China is much farther ahead, again, to use a linear expression that may or may not be true, but China's very developed in those ways. And so in some ways like this, it is well placed to handle a crisis like this. And the reason I say that is not to compare and contrast China and the States, but the reason I say that is because if you're listening to this or watching this, then there's a lot that you can take away from those strategies that have been in China, not just as a reaction to COVID-19, but have been in China just by course of its development of this industry. So extremely connected guests in bars, or already having 4 years of experience doing cocktail deliveries, means that people who are learning from the strategies that Chinese bars have taken aren't just getting 2 months of additional learning, but they're getting like 4 or 5 years of additional learning, because that's how long China's been working with this stuff.
So when you say delivered cocktails or cocktail delivery, is it all large format like the kegs? Or I think I saw, Chris, in one of your Instagram stories, you were highlighting a bar where it was the bartender and possibly manager or 2 bartenders showcasing the different elements that go into one of their kind of cocktail kits. Can you just speak to that a little bit?
Oh, it's so cool. So it's not large format. In China, one thing that China's very strong about is eating the whole buffalo, so to speak. So what I mean by that is there is no stone left unturned. There is no opportunity that is not fully explored. And only when it fully fails in every permutation is it abandoned. So in that sense, if there are cocktails, then you had better believe that there is ice delivery, full whiskey set delivery, single serve cocktail delivery, fractional cocktail delivery of maybe just shots of different
What?
cocktails. Sure.
Totally.
Why not?
That's awesome.
For the price of one cocktail, you could get 5 little tasters.
Yeah.
There's cocktail mixer delivery to pair with a whole bottle. There's
some bars are doing full, like 5 servings of a mulled wine already preheated and served and sent over to you. Some of them, the one that we ordered from Union the other night was East India, that was for a serving for 2, and it was vacuum sealed with 2 orange slice garnishes.
Wow.
With the ABV on it, they've already thought it all out. The brand that supported them, logo on it. I mean, it was quite. One of our friends, Cross, is also doing canned cocktails.
Yep.
So smaller size, these little cool canned versions, but you pop it open, you throw it over ice, and it's done. So it's pretty interesting to see all the different formats. And so it can go from small to much larger, but that has always been the case.
Yeah.
You know?
If you had to guess, what's the I guess on-premise market versus off-premise for cocktails?
It depends on
question.
It depends on who's doing the selling. So just like Mick alluded to earlier, there's some businesses that their whole model is just off-premise cocktail delivery.
So it's kind of like the ghost kitchen thing that we're seeing in the US.
Yeah, but they're
a little bit.
So it's their own third-party brand that then does business development projects with other famous bars. So it's a co-branded RTD cocktail using that bartender's recipe.
Cool.
And then they do awesome. And then they license the recipe. They do a profit sharing. They also do a lot of sales to hotels because they are made in a commissary kitchen that has X, Y, and Z certifications that hotels can therefore put them in mini bars. So it's already a thing in China that if you go to your hotel, maybe in the mini bar, instead of that little plastic sad bottle of spirit that's in your mini fridge, it's actually a premixed cocktail by a famous bar and a famous bartender.
Yeah.
You can have their recipe in your room. So that's already a thing. So that's like one whole business and one whole avenue of this.
Yep.
There's another avenue of this that is just normal bars selling their cocktails and stuff delivery, which I'm sure they'll tell you it's not a massive part of their business, but it increases the size of their pie for sure. Like there's people who probably would like to go to your bar, but they're feeling lazy, or they just want to stay in, or maybe they're sick in this case.
Or they want to have people over
Yes.
and they want your food and your drinks to serve people. So drinking at home now is a little bit more common. It's slowly growing as people travel more, especially in China. So people now are getting party kits or cocktails delivered to their favorite bars, and they're able to host, and they don't have to worry about a thing. It's already been done for them. Yeah.
Right.
Bottles of wine and stuff. Like we have a friend who runs a couple oyster bars here in Shanghai, and I would say his restaurant is always dead, but they are wildly successful. They're wildly successful because his restaurant, which used to be really busy, now is just the tip of an iceberg of this whole delivery system of people who just want fresh oyster and a bottle of Pinot Grigio and your steak or whatever. Like they just want to have that experience at home and feel fancy. So for some restaurants and bars, this has become rather than 20 or 10% of their business, has maybe become 80% of their business.
Wow.
Just because the brand's so strong. And what's interesting is that something like mass quarantine, the strategies that come out of this and the different business models that come out of this don't necessarily disappear when everything's over, right? You're creating something that probably will continue to exist after this is all over. So interestingly, there's a lot of joking going around about how introverts have been social distancing their whole lives, and now everyone's
I'm an introvert. I said that to my sister.
I surprisingly am too. I actually don't mind. I was like, stay at home for 2 weeks. Okay.
Right.
I missed the dog so much.
but there's people for whom this is a market correction more than a emergency measure.
Right.
And
right.
there's a lot of people who are ironically going to feel more seen during this time than by businesses than they
Yep.
probably have their whole lives.
Yep.
Yeah.
And people who are maybe more comfortable having a remote personal trainer session or a remote check-in with their nutritionist or a remote cocktail experience because they just get anxious about going to bars, but they're really into the cocktails and stuff.
Yep.
And if you were to offer them a chance to, here's a great example of where China gets this really right, I think, and they're way ahead, is that, so imagine you've got a cocktail set, right? So you've got 5 cocktails that are packed together and it's from your bar. Okay, well, now imagine that the bartender does a live stream and says to their audience via WeChat, or in the case of the States, probably Instagram or Facebook, to everyone who's tuning in, hey guys, like, order our live cocktail set, and our mixologist is going to do a live stream on Saturday at noon, and we're all going to taste these cocktails together and have a social experience, and we're all going to listen to the same Spotify playlist together, and we're all going to like be here remotely. And then they'll pour it, and then they're drinking and talking, like having that whole bartender experience, which maybe if you're somebody who's like introverted, maybe you've always wanted to sit there and just ask a bunch. We've all like met the weird mustachioed guys over the bar who are like super nerdy into this stuff, but like
don't want to talk to people.
Yeah, exactly. I was trying to think of a nice way to say that.
Surprise! Monin actually did something really interesting. Monin did like learning how to use what you have at home, and did these little sessions where people would tune in and actually make their own drinks at home. So I was joking around yesterday. Shout out to my friend Elliot, but I was like, everyone's turning into apartment bartender.
Yeah.
I was
right.
Right. So,
and he's like, get out of my space.
It's really cool to see people be very receptive. I think that is also the second stage of this, is remembering that as our bars pivot as consumers, people can really start to go, how can I separately, instead of just throwing money at a bar, how can we keep the culture alive? How can we tune in? How can we adapt? How can I learn at home? It'll be interesting to see how people, how a consumer sort of pivots with the bar. I've been watching it unfold so far here. It's been quite interesting.
So what, you guys might be a little bit more limited in terms of, access to technology, but besides WeChat, is there any other technology you've seen people using, either again for a commercial purpose, so to speak about their business, or to your point, to stay social?
I can tap into that.
Go for it.
So, it's very interesting. When I worked at my last company in Ability, who what we helped is help brands from around the world come to Asia. It's very interesting to see that brands globally don't have a plan for, especially China, because of the firewall. So Instagram, Google, Facebook, everything is blocked. There's a firewall. You have VPN to turn it on. Now, can you access and turn it on? And yes, does it become a painful mess? Yes. And
do Chinese people do that? No, not really.
Not really. Some of them will connect, but I mean, it's limited. There is a few people who will spend the energy to do it. Now there's Douyin, Weibo, there's all of these other apps that function here. There's an equivalent to YouTube. There's an equivalent TikTok that we know in the US is already, that is a Chinese born app. And
I was going to say, it's
really different. So yes, all of these avenues are being used to monetize. The influencer model in China is actually fascinatingly different than it is in the US.
Yes.
People can.
It's better monetized.
It's 100%. So.
And that's just because the platform is better?
Yeah. Yes. Because if you look at, like, if you're an Instagram influencer, and I know I've had a lot of insights, I've done comparisons directly to what they can do on something like Douyin, right? You can actually see how much of the money you're making, how much time people are spending, the actual analyzing of how your interactions are with a customer are way more transparent to both parties. So you can actually see and understand what you're paying for. And the influencers that have reach, that's where most of the consumers are buying. So they want to know, like, so I'll put plans in place for brands who come out here and I'll say, this are the things that you need to do. And I often get laughed at because people don't think that. They're like, oh, that's the influencer thing, I don't want to do that. I said, this is how it functions here. So yes, there are apps that are being used that are completely different from the States, but they have also been being used way longer. That channel is open. So I'm enjoying watching our bars actually now lean in and tap into that, and it's forcing a lot of international brands to also understand that channel. So in a way, this has been a gift, I think, to a lot of people, and they're accessing new consumers that they would have never had access to before.
So that's the Chinese side, which is really insightful, and I deeply encourage people to do a research of and just have a better learning.
Or call me.
Or call Micaela. She's got a great day rate. I in terms of what people can take away from this discussion that is useful in the West for right now in a crisis time, everything that people have been doing in China, as Mick said, has a Western equivalent. So, here there are all kinds of apps and all kinds of ways to play that don't exist in the States. It's just more developed, it's more robust, it's more integrated. But there's equivalents, right? So like I mentioned earlier, doing an Instagram Live or an Instagram TV where you are promoting your bar, getting your soundtrack, whether it's over Spotify or whether it's over other kinds of live streaming services, is really useful. You could do a webinar to have people who are at home be making cocktails and teaching them how to use the stuff that's in their bar. There's a great article that Drink Magazine did that's just talking to bartenders in Hubei in the eye of this whole storm and talking about how they've been getting along. And one of them, they've got, like Mick said earlier, all these bars have their chat rooms. This is, by the way, a great time for people to consider doing this, whether it's on WhatsApp or whether it's on Facebook. Groups, like really taking time now to care for the 1,000 true fans that your bar has. Really taking that time to cultivate the culture where perhaps before you were busy networking with other bars or working on your own recipe development. Like this, one of the things that we've seen out here in China as this has developed over the last 2 months is that none of this should be taken for granted. So just because you've had bar guests or just because you have cocktails that sell doesn't translate necessarily to people continuing to care about your bar or people continuing to care about your cocktails as this is unfolding. Like you need to continue to compel people in a open market, just like you do when your bar is open, to continue to come through your doors digitally and care. So how does that work? Well, you've got to be interested in people and what they want and what they're feeling and be here to listen. All of the things that bartenders should be doing, which is just listening more than we speak and being there for people and all of these functions like people still have a need for, but things have just been all shuffled around. So it's people's first thought is not necessarily like, I need somebody to talk to. How can I get in touch with my local bartender? But you've got to think like before Facebook, once upon a time, there was a world where bartenders would have a Rolodex of their regulars and they would call them on the phone and say, hey, I'm going to be on Stick on Saturday. Are you coming by? Like that once was a thing and we just haven't done it. Because bartending as an industry and as a craft has traveled down this digital road with everything else. But here we are again, right? So getting in touch with those people and making that time to compel them to care and show them that you care about them is going to be really important. So I guess what I'm saying is that it doesn't really matter what specific, some of the stuff that works in China isn't going to work there. Some of the stuff that works there isn't going to work here, but the themes are the same. And the overall mentality of treating this time productively is still the same. So really sit and find ways to touch people in a meaningful way. And if you're going to do delivery, for example, make it cool and make it compelling and do some storytelling. Like the bars that I've seen that have done this pretty well are bars that will put together, like they'll do a handwritten note from their team and a photo of their bar team standing there together, and like just reminding people what they're supporting, that when you're ordering this cocktail, you're not just ordering a cocktail, you're supporting all 8 of us. Like we're here, we're doing our best, and putting some messaging in there. If you want to reach out, like we're having a digital hangout on Thursday at 5:00, like tune in, and a bunch of us like-minded people will come together and drink these cocktails and just hang out and talk. You know what I mean? Like still finding ways to be creative and create community. People still have a craving for that. Mick and I can tell you, we're stuck in our apartment. We definitely need to talk to people.
Yeah.
Like, this is we've, otherwise it's just me and her and the dog, and now it's just me and her because the dog for the next couple of weeks. So like this is more important now than ever, and it doesn't matter how you get to people. Everyone's going to have a different road to get there, but like none of this is automatic, and none of this is free, and like nobody's gonna contribute and just like pay the tips that you're used to getting. There's going to be organizations are out there. There's going to be like relief funds. There's going to be bartender relief and all this kind of stuff, maybe. But everybody's, I don't want to say like it's everyone for themselves, but people are all in a sense of crisis. So like people putting their hands up and saying, what about me? Well, yeah, but like, what about healthcare workers, and what about Red Cross, and what about the elderly, and what about hospice workers, and right? So there's no automatic compulsion that people should just give stuff to you. And it's going to be up to you to read the situation, stay informed, stay flexible, continue to pivot. Set up a profile on a freelancer website. Maybe you've got some other talents, right? Maybe you can do some graphic design. Maybe you can do some little side projects and get some money coming in, right? But nothing's free, and it's going to be for a long time. So like, that's kind of my bottom line, is just to really stay open and active and imaginative.
I don't know if either of you have read, I think it was Outliers. Have you read that Malcolm Gladwell book?
I'm a big Gladwell nerd fan here.
So I think it was in Outliers. I could be wrong, but he was talking about Martin Luther King, and maybe I'm misquoting this. It could be. I'm sorry. This is from the Simon Sinek TED Talk. Yes, I'm like, I know you're in the same department here, but he's talking about how nobody showed up for the Martin Luther King "I Have a Dream" speech for him. They did it for themselves. And I think that's what you're saying, is this is an opportunity to figure out the value you are providing and figuring out how to communicate that to people.
Are you saying that I'm the Simon Sinek of our time?
Sure. Sure, happily.
I challenged him down, but he's down already. So just kidding.
It's very true. People are ultimately. I mean, I don't want to say people are ultimately self-interested, but the fact of the matter is that you've got to create value that people feel compelled to participate with.
Yes. And
they want to feel like they're part of something. No one buys a cocktail for the cocktail. No one comes to your bar just for the drinks. They just don't. So I strongly encourage people to separate the quality or perceived quality of your recipe development and your test. Like, no, you're not going to pick cocktail set A over cocktail set B, because cocktail set A really has that bar spoon of maraschino dialed in. Like, it's just not going to happen. So why do people buy anything? I think this is a great opportunity for bartenders to stop and have a think about, what is it people really like about your bar?
Yes.
Right? And how can you create some of that experience for people in their homes? And it's not going to be like the recipe, but there's going to be new stuff that weren't part of your bar to begin with. So you're going to have to think about the POSM and the specific bottles you use and how you advertise it and the price point and the portions and all this kind of thing. Our friends at Hope and Sesame, which is a bar in Guangzhou, have a really great Instagram story I recommend that people check out, all about the things that they did to position their delivery cocktails, because it's going to be a crowded marketplace of other bars that are doing this. So just really think hard about, why should people care, and how are you giving value to their lives? How are you making this time bearable? And now more than ever, it has always been the case that bars are sort of in competition with movie theaters or gyms or restaurant. Like, people could spend their time and money with you, or they can just go home and read a story to their kids, or that's a very sad parallel, or they can you can do a million things with your time and money, right? Now that people are stuck at home, they are even more mixed up, and like, everything is now a level playing field. So you are, as a bar, you're now competing with Kindle, and you're competing with a live stream, and you're competing with Netflix, and how are you going to cut through that noise?
Something I'll say to consider too is that I haven't seen a lot of people, not just in China, in general, speak in this pivot, be able to still speak to certain people. There are people who are very still eco-conscious and they want to know, is there a closed loop, some way that maybe I can return everything that you send to me, or what you're using, the items that you're using could have been waste, making me feel better. There are people like that, thinking about that avenue. There are still people that want cocktails that they want non-alcoholic. A lot of people think it's only just alcohol.
Good point.
So just thinking about all of these, I mean, there's still trends. Just because there's a pandemic, there's a global trends of things that people really, that speak to them. Especially like someone like me, I don't really feel like drinking that much, but I want a little bit. So low ABV, all these other options are just something to consider. But I to echo what he said, it's going to be your opportunity to translate who you are and who your brand is and what you can offer in a different way. So I've been holding my black obsidian, just trying to cleanse my life. But yeah, sorry. I'm excited to see, actually, even though tough times, I feel like every time there's a tough time, something really beautiful comes out of it, and people come alive and come together in a very different way. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out in the States, how it's played out here as well.
So what advice do you have for people who are feeling lost and incapable? Because I think that your comments make a ton of sense for people who feel like they might be able to discover the next step. Yes. I think there are some people who are immobilized or paralyzed because they don't even know where to start. So what does that first step look like?
The first thing I'd say is, I think on some level we're all feeling immobilized and incapable. And Mick and I right now are putting on our best face, and we're holding our obsidian, and we're getting our Palo Santo, and we're trying our very best right now to give people some information that maybe is productive and useful and different from all of the Instagram noise and political noise and memes and just general bullshit that's floating around, that's frustrating in a way, because it's just distracting from like, yeah, I get it, toilet paper's funny, but like, fuck, what are we gonna do? Like, what can I do? And there seems to be a lack of that kind of information, and if you feel that way, you're definitely not alone. This is totally uncharted territories for everybody. No one can tell you how to feel or how you should feel or how you should be responding. Like, these are some ideas that we have, and it's kind of how we've been maintaining and how we see other businesses in our area maintaining. But we're all doing this for the first time. So
Yes.
that's the first thing I guess to say is, like, be generous with yourself.
Yeah.
At first, like, it's
Cry, like,
yeah.
feel it, like, it hurts, it's frustrating, like the idea that we can't walk our dog is frustrating as hell.
Yes.
But but it is for the better. We're all doing this for something bigger than us, and that's kind of the big one. Part of, I think, after acknowledging what's going on is jumping in and just saying I need a plan. So I have had a life coach for a while, and I adore her for many reasons. It's not therapy, but it is someone to say, I believe in designing your life. I believe in you need a plan. And sometimes we know what we want, but we can't articulate it. We can't figure out the way there.
Yep.
So there are a lot of life coaches. I belong to a lot of groups and things like that, where the life coaches are offering like smaller power sessions. So like 30 minutes, 45 minutes of just like, hey, let me help you cope, and let me help you deal, and let me show you the way. So I think putting a plan in, whether that's having a life coach, whether it's sitting down with your team, whether it's sitting down with your spouse, your family. I mean, I had a conference call with my mom, my brother, and my sister, and was like, how are you guys going to navigate this, trying to help? And so setting a plan in place is probably the one thing that for us, it was like, okay, so here's how we'll get through the next 10 days and then the next week, just kind of going. And I'm remembering you can plan for long term, but to be fluid in that as well. This is all fluid, so you also have to be fluid.
Yes.
What you will plan for may not necessarily work in a week from now, but that's okay. And so then just sit down again and revisit it and see what's working and what's not. So just being comfortable with the fact that maybe you can ask for help and ask for guidance. It's not completely far-fetched.
I think it's fair to say, back to what we mentioned earlier, that like, this is us doing our best to give people some ideas that we feel like are productive, but it's also fair to say that every day is a reset on that process. So like, there is not a day that goes by that at some point in time we don't have a moment of just like, what is all of this? Like, this sucks, and it's going to continue to suck, and it's going to continue to be difficult for probably into 2021. I mean, when you really think about like, we've all got to make it through a whole nother winter of this together before there's a vaccine, is very likely, right? So this isn't short term. It's going to be like the next year. So on some level or another, right? Maybe things get under control and there's a limited new normal. But just like Mick is saying, is just reset. You know, I have a little planner that I use. That's my productivity planner. But making a list of like 3 to 5 things that you absolutely want to get done, or just that you think are productive for the next steps. And it's going to be really frustrating. We have rebudgeted our business, just talking from our side as a distributor and our China side. Oh, I've been through like 15 P&Ls. Just like, well, what happens if this happens? And what happens if that happens? And then things change again, or then there's a new government allowance for negotiating with staff, or there's a new allowance for some rental deduction, and then you re-budget everything, and you know, what can I do in this case, and what happens if I get investment in the following 5 quantities, and let's make sure that we're just ready with a plan. And that's frustrating, and it's exhausting to have to sit and re-go through everything over and over again. But the fact of the matter is that, like, like I said earlier, none of this is free, right? Nothing's automatic, and nothing's given, and nothing's guaranteed. And so you've just gotta, it's hard, but you've just gotta every morning just wake up and say, here we are in the apartment again. What are we going to do to make it feel human? What are we going to do to not hate each other's guts by the end of the day? What are we going to do to make, and the answer to that is we have times that we're having a date so that we still feel like there's some like romance in our relationship, even though we're living in the same 3 rooms.
Sure.
And then times that we're spending apart just doing stuff, but like it's, if you feel like this is confusing and not easy, you are in 100%, I'm sure, of the population.
Yes.
So just be generous with yourself, reset. What are some things that I can do today? What are the most important 2 or 3 things that will make this more bearable and feel like it's a little more productive?
After you have a plan, I think some of the things that you can do are to reach out to people. And I think there's 2 ways to do that, though. One of them is to reach out for yourself. I mean, there's emotional support that is needed. I have been speaking to my mom every day, or anyone that just makes me feel less crazy about all this and reminds me I'm not alone. But then the other side of that is, as a community and as a whole, it is our job to reach out to say, hey, how are you doing? I've actually made a point to write down 3 people a day. And I've been like, hey, I'm just checking in. How are you doing? What can I do to help you? And maybe they can say, I don't need anything, but do you need anything? And you'd be very surprised at how many people are just trying to cope and that way. So just not only your consumers and the people, the guests for your bars or whatever, I think those are 2 really important things. So take time to heal you and to get it all out, because it's there. Journal, whatever it is that you do, but then also just reach out to your people. You will feel a lot better contributing to all of this, rather than, just because we have to socially distance and not be there doesn't mean that we have to lose touch and with our people. And at the end of this, hopefully all of our bonds are much stronger.
So just to go off of what Micaela said, one thing that I find to be true, not just in a situation when we're all in a global quarantine, but also just in my own life outside of this, is that you cannot pour from an empty cup. So if you're feeling lost or confused or scared, I would just take some time, take care of yourself first before you start rushing to, deal with your staff. And I'm not talking about days. Like, you can really just take a couple hours and just center yourself. Don't go down a social media spiral. Don't spend this time watching the news. Just like do something that makes you feel good. Do a little exercise or something, light a candle, take care of yourself, take a deep breath, take some quiet minutes, think about, just center yourself. And that will hopefully put you in a mindset that you can think about, okay, now what do I do next? What do I do for my business? There's been many times over the last, we're in 8 weeks of this mess now, between China and Singapore and different hotel rooms and just sitting in this room every day. And there's been many times for me personally, especially having to rebudget our business, especially having to, you can imagine 8 weeks in, like we've had to have some very difficult discussions with our staff, who are equally lost and need leadership, but also, you can imagine all of the difficult decisions a business needs to do as you are going into like week 8 with little to no revenue, right? So, and that is draining. It's emotionally draining. And I'm not sitting here saying like, woe is me. I'm just saying that it's especially difficult because you are going to have to show up for your guests or your staff, or if you want to pivot to delivery cocktails, or if you want to launch a remote service, or if you want to do all these things, like, wow, that takes a lot of energy. And you're going to have to sit there multiple times and take a deep breath and go, well, I'm going to be okay. This is going to be okay. This is going to be a long time, but I'm going to be able to get through it, and I am in service of a greater good here. Like, this is for my family, this is for my staff. You know, you've got to pull yourself together, because it's going to be for a long time. It's not going to be easy, and it's going to be hard. Like, parts of this, even the last 8 weeks for us, have been super hard, and you've got to steel yourself.
Yep. So I think for my closing question, to close it on a positive note, what is one thing that each of you have gotten to do in this period of time that you had not made time for before, and that you're happy you had the time to work on?
Why do I have to go
first? Because I wanted more time to think about my answer.
We'll edit out any spaces.
It's fine. I can edit. I know exactly. For me, it's been reconnecting with a lot of my family. A lot of people forget. I mean, we live far away, and we know we moved far away. So I think this has been a real opportunity to have conversations and say, I've missed you guys. You know, I really wish we would talk more. And so we've actually, a lot of my family members and I rekindled in a lot of ways, which has been really nice. Friends as well. Just reminding you of what's very important during these times. Reading. I have been reading so much. I got a little Kindle, which is very nice. But I love reading, and I finally reading things that, you know, fill my cup up, rather than be like, oh, let's get better at life. You know, sometimes it's overwhelming. You know, there's a lot of self-help books and things like that, and they're all great, but sometimes you just want to indulge, just like you would watch a movie. So just reading, cleaning, and what else? I mean, we had a lot of time to just sit around and play with our dog, which we really missed, I think, the most. Just uninterrupted 1 hour playtime. He was in heaven, but so we had to send him to the doggy daycare because we can't leave at all to take him for a walk. So a little bit of a sad part, but yeah. So we've been able to do a couple of things, and a lot of my friends are cooking more. Yeah. They just have all these recipes they keep saving and they haven't been able to use. So that's been nice. Yeah. Go ahead. Your turn.
Here. For me, I think it's been a time to really evaluate what's important. I think that definitely when everything's normal and you're just kind of sailing along, it's easy to just get into a space where you're just repeating and turning the gears and getting into these kind of routines. And some of them maybe are not very productive, or some of these things especially for business. I know this is more of a personal life question, but
take it however you want.
For business, definitely to sit and stop and really have a hard think about, like, is there a certain product that we even want to be selling anymore? Is there a certain strategy that we even want to be doing anymore? Like, yeah, this was a very low ROI thing, and maybe we got into it for a relationship reason once upon a time, and now here we are down the road, and it's like just this burning thing that everyone feels compelled to do. Those little areas of your business, it's a great opportunity to just reevaluate them, because you're going to have to make some difficult decisions for your business, no matter who you are, no matter what industry you're in. And having a hard look at internally and just say, brutal, like, what is working, what is not working, when this is all over, and someday it will be all over, what do I want my business to look like when this is finished? And can I use this time to pivot my services or product mix or staff composition or whatever to suit that vision? And I mean, it's a hard reset. It's a hard time to reset, but ultimately that's something that some people will come out of this with, is, you know, coming out leaner. I was talking to a friend of mine who's an engineer, and for whom we were just talking about different industries and how they're coping. And he was like, look, man, in the industrial world, mass layoffs happen. Like, this is a part of life. You know, you're in a factory and then the business goes elsewhere for a myriad of reasons. People in Detroit can tell you all about this, right? We used to have this contract and now the contract's canceled or it's over. Now there's a huge piece of our workforce that's redundant. And so this is, in some industries, this happens, right? Education's another industry where like sometimes people just get laid off due to circumstances that they have no control over. And a way that he compared this to that I felt was really helpful for me was he compared it to a forest fire. Like there's over time in a business or in a given system, there's all this just accumulating underbrush. There's stuff that was once useful that's no longer useful, but you don't really spend time thinking about it. And every now and then, naturally, cyclically, something happens that will trigger the clearing of all of that underbrush so that you can have a fresh start with the strongest and most viable pieces of your organization. And I just thought that was a really healthy way to think about it, that like these cycles, whether it's a virus or a global financial crisis or just the changes of habits and laws or whatever, like these big things happen. They do. Like there's whole books written about black swan events and how they're regular and perhaps misunderstood. And I just thought it was very healthy to think about it as like, this is you just getting a chance to clarify and really think critically about what you do and don't want. So that's on the business side. So that's professional things that I've gotten out of this, I guess, if you want to use those terms professionally, or kind of what's been the upside here. Personally, it's we've been here in Asia together, Mick and I, for 4.5 years, a year and a half in Korea, now a little more than 3 years in Shanghai. And one thing that's been a constant for us, or at least I can speak for myself, is for me, is it's been cool to share some of the experience of living in Asia and working in cocktails in Asia and doing all this. But I definitely feel like there's still a sense in the West of like, man, Asia's like, it may as well be on Mars. I don't think any of that's really applicable to me. It just seems so foreign and far away. And also there's a whole litany of cultural misconceptions and things that make it difficult to relate. One thing that's been nice in a weird way is here is a rare time when it's very clear that like for everybody, there's something that's very practical that you can learn from how things have rolled out in Asia, and how, whether it's through the government responses or just the way that businesses have reacted, even if only because the timelines of 8 weeks advanced.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been nice being able to, as people are wondering what to do, it's made me really proud in a weird way to be able to share this with our friends and family back home, to be able to contribute some value here. Like all we're doing is what we've always been doing, which is just sharing our experience out here. I'm really happy that it's been meaningful to people,
Mm-hmm.
and that people have found it relevant and useful in a time that there doesn't seem to be a lot of real practical,
Yes.
Pragmatic, tactical advice about like, yeah, this is hard, but like, what do I do?
Yeah.
I'm never prescriptive and try to tell people like what to do, but I can just share, and we can just share things that we find to be useful
Mm-hmm.
out here in case there's something that people can grab onto and use in their own lives or businesses. So I am really happy that we can be there for people and that we can help people to connect. And who knows, maybe this will be a pivoting point that we remember of when people started to really take a close look at what's happening in Asia, because it's been very impressive to me and Mick, or at least to me, like all of the interesting things that you can learn out here, and the different perspectives and the different ideas. And I hope that it's the start of a dialogue that continues well after this, of like, man, there's a lot that we all have to learn, and we're happy to share some of the stuff that's interesting, but hopefully, and it's always a two-way street, but I'm just proud that we can be out here and share what we can if people find it useful.
Mm-hmm.